I've traveled to 36 countries, and the majority of my travel has been alone. I would say 99% of my travel has been alone as a solo traveler. I did, however, travel with two of my colleagues to Ethiopia in 2017. Outside of that, um, all of my travels have been alone. Yeah, I remember flying from South Korea to Taiwan, probably in 2000 and, well, the only time I went to Taiwan was 2012. So I flew with a colleague on the same airlines. When we arrived, then he was like, "Well, buddy, I'll see you back at the office," and that was the end of that. Um, so all of my travel has been on my own, solo, and it's kind of um, sort of disheartening. It's like, dang, how come I didn't have anyone to travel with? But at the same time, it's also liberating. It's like, man, you can do whatever you want. You can go wherever you want, do whatever you want. And there's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And pretty much that sums up my travel. I've gone, I've traveled to 36 countries and 17 countries. I traveled to 17 countries in 2017, and that is very fast. In 2017, I was working in Saudi Arabia. I was earning a tremendous amount of money, and for the most part, travel was inexpensive. You could get to, exotic places from Saudi Arabia for less than $500 if you caught it a good deal. But anywhere, getting from Saudi Arabia, you could travel to Europe, Africa, and Asia for about $500. And that being the case, I had, pretty much carte blanche. I could travel to those continents easily. Well, I hadn't been to Peru. Correction, I hadn't been to Machu Picchu. The year was 2017, and I hadn't been to Machu Picchu, um, although I had been to Peru in 2015. That was the first time that I traveled there. Well, in 2017, I made it a point to travel from Saudi Arabia all the way to South America. Now, as I said, um, it was easy to get to Asia, Africa, and Europe from Saudi Arabia, but here I am, or there I was, traveling from Saudi Arabia all the way to South America. Again, I was earning enough money to do so, to pay for a flight, to pay for a long flight, um, to get me back, on this side of the hemisphere, of the globe. But I wasn't only going to visit Peru. If I was, I was of the mentality, I'm not going to fly all the way from Saudi Arabia to Peru because, after I, relocate to America back to Los Angeles, I could fly from Los Angeles to Peru easily, a 6 hour flight, you know. But what I was doing is I was preserving my job, you know. I had my job and I was like, well, this is my opportunity to travel. So I'm going to take this opportunity since I have this good job, since I have, accommodations. I'm just going to fly all the way to South America. But I'm not only going to stop in Peru, I'm also going to stop in Mexico, Cuba, Panama, Peru. And of course, since I'm flying from Saudi Arabia, I'm going to stop at home in Los Angeles to see my family. And I did all of that in addition to flying through Germany, I believe. Germany? No, excuse me. I flew through England. I flew through London, England. And so I was racking up the destinations. I flew through London, from Saudi Arabia. Excuse me, from Saudi Arabia, I think I stopped in Kuwait, but we stayed on the airplane and we had an hour long layover. And then from Kuwait, we flew to London. There, I had a 6 hour layover. I left the airport, jumped in. I took the train into Paddington Station, and I jumped out of the train there, jumped into a black cab in London, and I asked the cabbie to drive me around the city so I could see the sights, so I could at least say that I've been to London after having spent basically $200 in a matter of a couple of hours. I was back at the airport ready to board my flight because I had to make sure that I saw London. All right, so I went to Kuwait and then London. Then I got to LA. In LA, I saw my family. We had dinner together, and then maybe within 24 to 48 hours, I was on another plane to Mexico City. Mexico City, um, I believe I stayed in Mexico City 4 days. And then from Mexico City, I flew to, right. I stayed in Mexico City for 4 days. And when I flew to Cuba, my first trip to Cuba, I stayed in Cuba for, was it 4 days in Cuba? Another 4 days in Cuba? Yes, because I stayed in Cuba for 4 days my first trip, and then the second trip I stayed in Cuba for 10 days. Yes. All right. So I flew back to Mexico City. I stayed in Mexico City one night, and then I flew from Mexico City to Peru. I had a layover in Panama for a few hours. I did not leave the airport. And then from Panama, I flew to Peru. And then I basically retraced my steps from Peru back to Panama, back to Mexico, and then back to LA. And then from LA, I flew back to Saudi Arabia. And I probably stopped in Germany or Kuwait or Abu Dhabi. I'm not really certain. About that trip. Anyhow, that was my trip. And I was doing all of this all alone. And when I stopped in London, I paid $200 because I was paying out of pocket to do what I wanted, which was I wanted to see the city, and I didn't have a lot of time, and a taxi seemed like the best route. So I did that. When I got to Mexico City, I used Airbnb, and I stayed with a family there. And although I wanted to immerse myself in a very Mexican experience, while I was staying there, I learned that the family I was staying with, um, well, their daughter had lived like in San Bernardino or Pasadena here, in, basically Los Angeles. And I felt sort of like, that's not really Mexican. You're an Americanized version of a Mexican. You guys are just like whatever. But they knew exactly where to direct me to get some of the best tacos in near their home. Oh, I ordered like 5 tacos and a beer. It went down smooth. I was happy because I could get that authentic, Mexican food, like, whew, better than anything I had experienced. It was just, I mean, well, in LA, you can get some really good, tacos, but being that I was getting the tacos in Mexico, I'll say those tacos were better than any tacos I've ever had, right? So I stayed with with that family. I flew to Mexico. Excuse me. I flew to Cuba, and of course, I'm again. All of this is solo. I just booked my flights, and I'm like, I'm going. Now, I was a little wary about flying to Cuba um, because of all of the controversy surrounding flying Americans flying to Cuba. And what I did was I did a lot of research. I went on YouTube and I listened to a lot of vlogs. I did read as much as I could about it as well. But I watched more videos on Cuba. And I found a lot of YouTube vloggers were saying it's easy for Americans to get into Cuba if they fly through Mexico. And in 2017, although um, years prior, President Obama made relations or improved relations between the United States and Cuba, and I should not have felt, any, I should not have felt any way about traveling to Cuba. I still did um, because President Trump was in office, and Trump had, uh, he had stated that he was going to essentially close the border and limit American travel to Cuba. So I got in like right before President Trump, announced or that travel was off for Americans. Um, that never actually happened. He alluded to it, and if you really paid attention to what he said, to what President Trump said about Cuba, then you might have, felt some sort of way about traveling to Cuba. But he basically didn't do anything to stop Americans from traveling to Cuba. Well, I was cautious. I paid attention to the news. And so I made my trip because I knew that potentially President Trump could, close the border or close the door on Cuba again. And I did a lot of research, but everyone was basically saying there's no problem getting into Cuba, so just go. So I flew through Mexico, and then I got into Cuba all alone. I had a great time. I met a wonderful family, and I took lots of photos, and I have a lot of memories. All alone, all by myself. And then from there, I flew back to Mexico, and then from Mexico I flew to Panama. From Panama I went to Peru. Now Panama was just a layover, in Panama, and I had made that layover a couple of times before when I flew to Peru for the first time in 2015. All right, so there it was 2017. I'm in Peru for the second time because the first time that I was there, I was not able to visit Machu Picchu because I had a short window and I couldn't make it happen. I was back in Peru for the purpose of making my trip to Machu Picchu come true. I got there. I contacted the friends I made in Peru in 2015. And that was a blessing because I had people on the ground who could, potentially help me. So I contacted my friends to say, hey, I'm here again. Can we meet up? And we certainly met up. And I had people, on the ground. And that was nice. Um, let's see. I got to Machu Picchu, and getting to Machu Picchu for me was it was kind of stressful. It didn't have to be stressful, but I kind of stressed it because I didn't want anything to go wrong. I had a limited amount of time. In fact, I lived in Cusco for 2 weeks, and over that amount of time, I made sure that I was going to get to. That was my that was my speaker. All right. I had to make sure that I was going to get to Machu Picchu this time because I wasn't going to waste another trip. Well, what I did was um, I did a lot of research. I searched and searched. I watched a lot of videos to get as much information about traveling to Machu Picchu. And I bought my tickets ahead of time. I made my reservations. All of that stuff was already in place because I didn't want any problems. And one of the one thing that could have been a problem was the first train that leaves for Machu Picchu from Cusco leaves like around like 5 in the morning or maybe 6, but you have to be there around 5 in the morning, and you have to be there when that train arrives so you get out of there. Um, well, the friend who I was staying with helped me get up that morning and get to the train station. She didn't live too far from that train station, and so I got up and I believe I got a taxi, from her place to the train station, and then I was on my way. But even that, there could have been a hiccup. I could have overslept, or something could have happened, and I might have missed the train. But I didn't. I got to the train station, boarded the train, and then 3 hours later, I arrived in Machu Picchu. And the one thing that I discovered is if you get to Machu Picchu early in the morning, you could basically, if you have a reservation to enter Machu Picchu, you could basically go up the mountain, go to Machu Picchu, come down the mountain, and take the afternoon train home. Essentially, you can do Machu Picchu in a day. You could take the earliest train up. Once you arrive in Machu Picchu village or Machu Picchu city, you can walk up, climb up Machu Picchu, or take the bus. The bus would be faster. You get up there, you do your sightseeing thing, come back down, have a meal, and then get on the 3 o'clock train or what have you, and you could be back in Cusco. I didn't know that, and because I made sure that I was going to be in Machu Picchu, I booked. I stayed in Machu Picchu City for I believe 2 nights, so I had 3 days, and I gave myself enough time so that I would be able to see everything. But I had plenty of time. That's what I discovered when I arrived. I had plenty of time. But again, I had no idea what the heck I was doing. I knew how to dress and how to travel. I was prepared for, the elements, but I didn't know what to expect. And there's something about, yeah, you could follow a map and you could really, get as much information from the map. But what I found is it was like information overload. And I didn't want to just sit there and just read and read and read. I wanted to experience. And I wanted experience to be my teacher. And so I had a pass to enter Machu Picchu twice. So the first time I entered Machu Picchu, I hiked. I hiked all the way up from the base. I hiked from the base all the way to the entrance. I got in and I saw the sights and I looked around, snapped my photos and whatnot. And then I climbed. Did I climb down? Yes. And then I climbed all the way down. So I went from the base, basically sea level, all the way to Machu Picchu's level. It took me about an hour to hike that, maybe slightly longer. It was definitely about an hour. And that was day one. Then on day two, instead of hiking that distance, I took a bus. I took the bus up to the entrance. And then from there, I hiked from the Machu Picchu, sort of the landing, all the way up to Montaña Machu Picchu. All right. Again, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I didn't know where anything was, and I was pretty much guessing because there were so many people around, and I knew what I wanted to do, but I, of course, didn't have an idea. I didn't know the lay of the land, so I didn't know exactly where to go. Case in point, when I got to the landing at Machu Picchu, the real site, I knew or I had seen an entrance to Huayna Picchu. Huayna Picchu is this steep mountain at the far end of Machu Picchu. Or Huayna Picchu is actually a completely different mountain, but it's at the farthest end, maybe on the southern end. And I walked all the way across Machu Picchu to Huayna Picchu because I thought that I had a reservation, or I had a reservation to gain access to Huayna Picchu. Well, Huayna Picchu is the most dangerous, hike that you could do, and I actually I only had a reservation to enter Machu Picchu, but because I saw the entrance to Huayna Picchu, I thought that that's where I was going to go because I had the intention of hiking up Montaña Machu Picchu, or what is called Montaña Machu Picchu. So basically, I walked all the way across Machu Picchu. Took me like maybe 10 minutes to walk across. But I'm walking all alone, and some people are a lot of people are in their tour groups and stuff, and I'm just this lone traveler just walking across the just walking across. And I get to the entrance and the lady is looking at me like, what the hell are you doing here? And I'm like, oh, I'm here to go up Montaña Machu Picchu. And then she's like, Montaña Machu Picchu is back there near the entrance. And I was like, no. So I felt so embarrassed. Like, oh man, I just walked all the way across here and I looked like I knew where I was going and everything. Like, or at least I tried to look like I knew where I was going. And so she's like, nah, fool, you got to go all the way back to the entrance. I was like, oh man. So I walked all the way back across this sort of plateau, where the landing, the base, sort of. I walked all the way across to the entrance. And at the entrance, there were these two corridors or two paths. And basically, I chose the wrong path. And so I chose, for the viewer, there are two paths. I chose the path on the right, but I should have chose the path on the left. So when I got back to that sort of fork in the road, I chose the path on the left. And so I went there. And I got to the entrance. They have you sign your name and write the time of entrance because they don't want anyone getting stuck on top of the mountain or anyone getting lost. So basically, you sign your name, and if they have to, they'll send a search party up to get you, which they don't want to do, right? So I signed in. I hiked all the way up to the top of the mountain, and by the time I got to the top, there were a few other people who were there who had made it to the top before me, and they were meditating, and they were looking at the views and just taking everything in. And I did the same. I looked around and I enjoyed the view and I enjoyed my time up there, the peace, the quiet, the serenity. I ate an apple. Oh, excuse me. I didn't eat the apple. I saw this young woman eat an apple and I thought, man, she looks like she's enjoying the heck out of that apple because we're at the top of this mountain. Maybe it was because I was a little lightheaded that I was focusing on this woman eating this apple, but every bite she took, it like sort of resonated with me. It was like, I was like, oh man, probably because I didn't have anything to eat. I was like starving up there. Maybe that's what that was. But I distinctly remember her eating that apple. On the way up the mountain, I crossed paths with this young boy from Brazil. He's about 8 or 9 years old, and he was walking with his mother. And I asked him like, "Where are you from? How old are you, and whatever? And which city are you from?" And he said he was from Sao Paulo, Brazil. He's from 9 or 10 or something. And what the dude told me was that his life in Sao Paulo wasn't great, and he said that he was really enjoying being in Peru. He said he loved it. It was so peaceful and so nice. And yeah, he said his life in Sao Paulo wasn't great, so he really enjoyed being away from Sao Paulo. And I was like, wow, that was really touching. Like, dang, man, this kid's having the time of his life right now. Hiking this mountain, and he had maneuvered. He was walking faster than his mom, and the reason why I talked with him is because we met at this particular rest area, and I looked at him like, man, this guy's kind of young, to be hiking this mountain. So I asked him, his age and where he was from and all that kind of stuff. That's how we got to talking. I remember him. I remember when I got to the top of the mountain. I remember that woman with the apple. And then I remember by the time I got to the mountain, I got to the top of this mountain, I wondered, all right, I've already looked around, I've already snapped some selfies. Um, Now what do I do? And that's when I checked my watch. I checked my watch and I was surprised because the time was 10:08 a.m. Again, I didn't know how to get up the mountain. I didn't know, um, you know, I really wasn't thinking about time. Um, and even when I arrived at the mountain, I wasn't even thinking, I wasn't even thinking about the time or how much time it was taking me. It was just my journey of getting to, the summit of this mountain. When I saw 10:08, I said to myself, man, that's strange because my numbers, you know, I said, man, that's strange because 109, like, that's my number. So I said, at 10:09, I must be getting a sign from the spirits, from the Inca spirits. They must be telling me that, yes, we are with you. And I said, all right, 109, that's my number. I said to myself, at 10:09, just 1 minute after I had checked my watch, 1 minute later, I said, I'm going to start my descent off of the mountain. It's going to go down. And that's what I did. Because in that moment, I had looked around, I saw everything that I needed to see. I snapped all my selfies, and I was like, what else is there to do? I checked my watch, and it was like, my watch was telling me, you have 1 minute left to enjoy all of this. And then you should go down the mountain. And so I said, all right, that's the plan. And I started climbing down the mountain. I remember I encountered a family on their way up the mountain as I was, going down the mountain. And here was a baby and a mother and father. And I was like, what is a baby doing on this mountain? Now, the baby wasn't alone. I believe the baby was being carried by the father or the mother. But what struck me was that this was a Chinese family. And so I asked them, where they were from or whatever. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure they said that they were from Peru. And although that may sound shocking to someone who's listening to this story, it's not uncommon for Asians to live in Peru. Peru even had a Japanese president at one time. And there are plenty of Chinese restaurants that can be found there in Peru. Well, anyway, that's my story. I didn't know what the heck I was getting myself into. I tried to do as much research as possible. But at the end of the day, it was like, man, just throw all of that, out the window. Trust yourself and just go. Inevitably, I did make mistakes. But you have to just be humble enough to, or just correct your mistakes, and don't have too much hubris to say, or too egotistic to say, oh, I'm never gonna make a mistake, and I would never make that. No, you're gonna make mistakes, and you just go, all right, because your destiny is waiting for you, is waiting to be discovered. Yeah. That's my story about my trip to Machu Picchu. Peace.